Hello again, everyone. Welcome back for another COVID conversation as we start these conversations reflecting on the past year of this COVID-19 pandemic and how congregations, the churches, pastors, especially in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, have dealt with and coped with and found their way through this pandemic. And I'm glad to be joined today by Pastor Matt Stanek. He's a pastor in the Queens, New York. And in just a little bit, we'll ask him to tell us about life in New York City and how all of those things go. But Pastor Matt, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm real good. It's good to see you, Pastor
Yeah.
Sellers.
So you were telling me that you just got done meeting with your organist because we're right on the cusp of Holy Week.
That's right.
And so just as by way of getting started, tell us about what you guys are going to do for Holy Week, and then we'll delve into some other things as well.
Yeah. Holy Week is fun out here. I don't know if it's due to the Catholic influence or what, but like Palm Sunday processions are a big deal out here. So that's always something that we've done. And we're hoping to do, weather permitting, this year.
So you'll do that procession outside?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've done that in the past, and yeah, it's great. And then the other big one is the Easter Vigil.
Okay.
And that's something that my congregation here, I've been here 4 years now, has never done.
Okay.
But I did the Easter Vigil at my previous congregation, and it was a blast. I mean, you do the new fire in a public park, and then you process into the building, and members from this congregation and myself have joined other local congregations, Missouri Synod churches that have the Easter Vigil, and it's a blast. So Holy Week's a lot of fun out here.
Sure. Now, real quick, just by way of education, what day does the Easter Vigil happen?
Oh, sure.
And what's the thought process behind it? Why is it an edifying, faithful thing to do, even if it, as Missouri Synod Lutherans, Easter Vigil and things on Saturday sound a little Roman Catholic.
Yeah,
it's a Christian tradition. So tell us a little bit about what that Easter Vigil is.
Yeah. Oh, so the Easter Vigil is historically like the first celebration of Easter, of the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
And this has, between Western and Eastern traditions, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, has taken on, it takes on its own flavors and nuances. But yeah, so traditionally it's that first service. Traditionally you would start it after sundown, which is not functionally practical for a lot of our churches. So I know at my previous congregation in Manhattan, we started at 7 o'clock at night, and depending on when Easter fell, it was close to sundown or not really. And you just rolled with it. But the main edification of that service for me is it kind of, it brings the specialness of Holy Week to a high point. All those midweek services, those 3 days of Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and then getting into the weekend. And it's a special service where, again, historically and traditionally, you did first communions, baptisms, confirmations. And so it kind of brings out a unique crowd and just a unique energy and perspective. And it's again, depending on how you do it, you could have some really long readings from the Old Testament, creation, flood, Exodus, readings that you're not sitting down with really at any other point of the year. And so, it just kind of moves through all these different movements of the Christian life in one setting. And it could be, I've seen Easter Vigils done as quick as an hour. I've seen it go as long as 3 hours. My own practice has been somewhere in the middle. But it's a fun service. So.
Sure. Sometimes most years, my family, just me, my wife, and my kids, we do our own Easter Vigil, and I encourage others to read through the book of Lamentations.
Oh, that's cool.
Jeremiah's lament at the destruction of the temple, with that great middle chapter there of the resurrection, but then the rebuilding of the temple and the end of the exile, but goes back into the lament, leading back to Easter Sunday.
That's cool.
Well,
Yeah.
that's cool. I appreciate you sharing about the Easter Vigil.
Yeah.
As we transition now a little bit to kind of a reflections on COVID-19 in this past year. Before we do that, tell us, somebody like me who's lived my whole life in suburban areas.
Yeah.
About life in New York City. You don't have to. You're not trying to sell us there, right? But tell us, like I think you wrote an art and you blog at theunbrokencord.com, and I was reading there, and you were talking about and the Queens, and you put this here, and it kind of checked me that everybody imagines New York City that there's a subway stop at every doorstop, and this sort of thing. And I've been to New York City a few times and I've read about it, but I was like, oh yeah, there's not a subway stop at every doorstop.
Right.
So put into perspective for us life in New York City and in those boroughs for us.
Yeah. So New York City itself is made up of 5 counties, which we call boroughs. And so when people think of New York, in cinematic New York, they're thinking Manhattan.
Okay.
Right? So that Manhattan is an island in between the East River and the Hudson River.
Okay.
And so it's the second least populated borough.
Okay.
Next to Staten Island.
Okay.
Its population itself is probably about 1.5 million, but that's subway stops nearly everywhere. That when people think of New York, that's probably what they think of.
Okay.
And then you have what are called the outer boroughs. Staten Island is kind of probably the closest thing to suburbia we have.
Okay.
It doesn't have quite 1 million people living on it. It's a kind of a larger space of land. It's really close to New Jersey.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a different kind of way of life there.
Yeah.
But then the other outer boroughs, the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn, are really these densely populated, not large land masses.
Okay.
Places where a lot of the country and a lot of the world kind of comes together, and kind of just diversity, but diversity on all sorts of different ways, though. Economic diversity, cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity. And it's interesting because I think in the United States of America, there's rightly a lot of talk about kind of creeping secularism.
Okay.
And in New York City, I don't detect secularism in New York City.
Okay.
New York is very pluralistic.
Okay.
And
now, real quick, make that distinction between secularism and pluralism, just real briefly for us.
So when I think, and so I'll just kind of define the terms how I use them.
Yeah.
When I think of secular, I think of less religion or absence of religion, and of course there could be a spectrum. Right. That. Pluralism to me is fervent religious activity, but of all kinds. Yeah. So in New York City, you could have neighbors who are Hindus, practicing Hindus. You could have neighbors who are practicing Orthodox Jews.
Right.
You could have Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, all sorts of Christian persuasions.
Okay.
Some more. It just you can run the gamut religiously. Just to kind of put it that way.
Right.
That's more pluralism than secularism.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So it's densely populated.
Yeah.
Lots of different religions represented and practiced. Now, do you have a car? This is a silly question, right? I grew up in Texas, and people ask me all the time when I would go visit, "Do you ride a horse?" So this is going to be a silly question in that same vein. You live in Queens. Do you have a car? Do you drive?
Very reluctantly, I have a car. Yeah.
Okay.
When we lived in Manhattan, we had no need for it.
Okay.
My part of Queens does not have really great, easy access to public transportation. Well, we have the bus,
Yeah.
which is great, but to the train.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like to you, it may sound ridiculous, but like, yeah, like I have to go a mile or two to get to a train.
Okay.
That's a pain in the neck here.
Right. Right.
Where it's a mile or two for a train. I don't have a train for,
Sure.
wherever. So yeah, we have a car.
Okay.
And I really hate driving around here because it's just, again, it's densely populated.
Yeah.
There are more cars in this kind of part of town.
Right.
So yeah, it's annoying driving around, but it's good to have a car when like you want to, so like Queens and Brooklyn, if folks have ever, looked at a map of the greater New York City area, Queens and Brooklyn actually share the landmass with Long Island.
Okay.
Stretches to the east of New York City.
Uh-huh.
And so if we want to kind of, escape for a day or so out to Long Island,
Right.
or drive upstate or wherever, it's nice having a car for that purpose.
Sure.
But yeah,
Now,
day-to-day activity, it's not nice. So
yeah. Now, I for those who are watching this after we have this conversation, I want to tell people that all of this is going to have a point. This is all going to play into conversation coming up. Now, so you have a car, you drive it reluctantly. It's a mile is to the nearest train stop, which is a hassle.
Yeah.
What about green space, yard space? What does that look like for generally speaking in your area, or generally speaking in New York City?
Yeah. So we don't have yard space.
Okay.
We live in a house.
Mm-hmm.
Our homes in this part of town are they're all connected.
Okay.
But they're all like houses.
Okay.
They're not apartments.
So they share exterior walls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just like right on top of each other. That's the way they've been built. Our home, our row on our street in 2020, actually, so it's even a year beyond that, celebrated 100 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so all those homes are 100 years old with, various improvements and whatnot over the years, but just right on top of each other. So no yard space, but we do have a place to park our car, which is great.
Yeah.
But, New York, and especially in recent years, even before the pandemic, has done a really great job at improving existing green space, parks, playgrounds, and even adding green space. And then St. John's, our congregation, in a neighborhood called Glendale, we're kind of right on the edge of two neighborhoods, Glendale and Woodhaven. And then we have a giant park in our backyard here, St. John's, called Forest Park, which shares the name of Forest Park in St. Louis. Yeah. No relation, but it's just this big, wide open space. And it's great. So New York really does a great job with common green spaces. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that and just giving us a little bit of perspective on some things that you don't necessarily see in the movies or might not do it. One more question about this. When you go to the grocery store, what is that? Is it a big grocery store? Like my grocery store is a freestanding thing with a giant parking lot and it's a huge store. What's your grocery store like? We have what's called a super Stop and Shop.
Okay.
And it's pretty big. It's part of like another kind of connection of like, there's like a urgent care. There's a Planet Fitness. There's like an Italian restaurant, so just kind of like a bunch of random things that kind of share this parking space, but it's like a two-level garage. So you pull in and you go in and you do your business, you get out. But I don't know if this is helpful, but if you had seen The King of Queens, Kevin James sitcom, that's this part of Queens. That's what's going on here. So
no, I appreciate it. And again, we're just trying. I want to lay the groundwork for some of the things that our conversation is coming up to get us away from thinking about cinematic New York City. Into maybe what is a more common experience, but also different from what so much of America experiences.
So then you have a lot of people who live in Queens, who commute into Manhattan, and who call Manhattan the city.
Sure.
And I think the overall energy of New York, definitely that originates in Manhattan, but still applies to the outer boroughs, is New York kind of just has like a life of its own.
Yeah.
And you hop on, it's kind of like a moving walkway at the airport.
Okay.
You hop on and you're along for the ride.
Yeah.
And it just goes.
Sure.
And you need to be aware of when you need to get off.
Right.
It's not going to stop it, itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Now tell us a little bit about life at St. John's. You said you've been there about 4 years now.
Yeah.
And so tell us about life at St. John's and some of the things that you've had to adjust and do differently in this past year.
Yeah. So St. John's is we have our roots in Brooklyn back to 1844.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then a group of folks moved here it moved to this part of Queens in 1936.
Okay.
And laid the cornerstone for the church that is here now. And yeah, they've been here ever since. Probably follows a lot of similar tales. A lot of our Missouri Synod churches where you kind of, we had a school, which was populated in its heyday, and congregation, which seats about 200, which was populated in its heyday. And then probably somewhere about 20-25 years ago, school attendance started dropping, congregation attendance started dropping, membership, to the point where it's 2021, in 2014, St. John's had to close their day school.
Really? Okay.
Really to make sure the congregation survived, because the school was just couldn't do both.
Yeah.
And a unique kind of New York thing that we've been doing ever since is we are renting out our school building to a charter school.
Oh, okay.
Which has provided us an ability to get out of debt, one, pay for deferred maintenance, two.
Oh, okay.
And keep going and actually have a mission and a ministry, three, which has been really, really neat to kind of walk into, because I came in after they had closed the school and brought in the charter. So I kind of came on the other side of that. But it's a really small church, tight group of people. Older, yes, but we also have folks who are raising kids here. Folks who are making decisions about where they're going to send their kids to college here.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a mix.
Okay.
But hyper local, people who mostly could walk here.
Okay.
And the folks who are here on Sunday, they are committed. They are committed. It's a core group of people.
Yeah.
And they care about mission and ministry. And again, being kind of guy who comes in on the other side of them having to make really hard decisions at school, which really affected them, and they, and lost members, and all sorts of that stuff. So to be on the other side of that with a group of people who have really worked through trauma, it's been a personal blessing to me and my family in a lot of ways. So
yeah. So tell us about this committed hyper local group. That sounds very close, and I think every congregation would call themselves a family, but I would imagine that being hyper local and so committed, and having gone through that decision to close the day school really solidifies a lot of connections. How did this pandemic impact those relationships? I imagine that there was some hardship because of those relationships weren't there, but then I imagine there's probably some benefits to that closeness of that family feel, and especially in the lockdowns of the start of the pandemic and even moving forward?
Yeah, so even getting before that, this might be a good way to explain kind of St. John's and then what happened with COVID. So St. John's, very much a kind of up close, personal, in your face kind of group. We like to gather around for communion, be on top of each other for communion.
Okay.
Sharing the peace here, is not just what a former professor of ours used to call the kind of like a holy howdy, like you're just kind of waving, saying hey and hi to people. It's several minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
You're on top of each other. You're in each other's face. You're catching up. You're sharing peace. It's not just coffee hour. It's you're sharing the peace of the Lord. But it's several minutes long, and that's kind of a New York City thing too. And so even before, COVID really, or even before shutdown, lockdown, shelter in place, pick your favorite term, occurred, we were already peeling back those things.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's what's, maybe interesting and unique, that I on a couple of things, we started peeling back those things, and we actually stopped public services before the state or city
said really?
About it.
Okay.
Yeah. We got a lot of good guidance, leadership and direction from the Atlantic District.
Oh, okay.
And the district president and the vice presidents, where before we went into the, we're not suspending public worship mode, they were getting on the phone with pastors, the district president and the vice presidents and the circuit visitors, and saying, hey, here's what we're hearing. Here's what we think is happening. Here's what we're recommending as adjustments. And even when it came time to suspend public worship, it was the district saying, we recommend you suspend public worship. And this is before the governor or the mayor even got involved.
Yeah.
And of course, they gave the usual Missouri Synod, how do we relate to the district caveats. We can't tell you what to do.
Yeah.
But based on the information we're receiving, we're recommending this, we're advising this.
Sure.
And we'll help you, what does that look like? Here's what, we think it looks like. They actually put together, okay, what does social distancing look like in a congregation? And then even later, when it came time to returning to operations, what does that look like? They put together a whole thing. So I have nothing but great things to say about the Atlantic District's leadership in that. But but just, it was, to answer your question, it was difficult because we loved the sharing of the peace. We loved fellowship hour, coffee hour, being on top of each other. We were doing a couple times a year, but, and this happened right around Lent and Easter. We had an Easter breakfast. What we did. We live in a parsonage, so a couple times a year we were inviting members of the congregation over to the house for kind of like a end of Advent, beginning of a Christmas party, and then just one other time just for the sake of it. And you're not doing that, and so that's a major issue with St. John's. It's difficult.
To have so much connection, and then to willfully and appropriately, based on the guidance and the circumstances, to begin to pull back.
It was enormously hard.
Was there any were you and the members of the congregation, the long-standing relationships, did that sustain you through not being able to, or did that make it harder to not come together?
So it made it harder in the sense that it's hard not to gather together, right? With the body of Christ and people you love that you have relationships with. But it made the being apart, because those relationships were solidified, it made it easy to get on the phone with people. And so one of the first things we did, it's myself, our administrative assistant, and our kind of long-term sexton / parish deacon.
What's a sexton?
So a sexton is somebody who traditionally cares for the church grounds.
Okay.
But is not the janitor, like somebody who actually cares for the church grounds.
Yeah.
So I think historically it also connected to like the graveyard.
Oh, okay.
We don't have a graveyard here. But also like, as we made him a parish deacon.
Okay.
Because we realized he was somebody who was doing a lot of just service oriented things for the people of God here.
Yeah.
But so it's the three of us. We kind of put like a call chain together.
Okay.
We were calling people early on. We were making sure our most vulnerable population were okay.
Yeah.
Multiple times a week. But because we're a small congregation, we were able to call folks weekly.
Oh, okay.
Check in and say, how are you?
Yeah.
You need anything from the grocery store?
Sure.
For some people who were not able to get out, or groceries were crazy as I imagine they were there.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how, I could get in there, but what's going to be left on the shelves? Do I even want to get into that mad situation for a number of reasons?
Yeah.
So we were able to, I think those relationships enabled us to be on top of each other. And so it was hard because we weren't with each other.
Yeah.
But the being able to still care for each other from a distance was very natural for us.
Okay. Now, was there anything else that you adjusted with your pastoral care and your office of holy ministry and the under shepherd to these people? Were there other things that you adjusted? I imagine, please tell me if I'm wrong, that before the pandemic, you would go visit people in hospitals, you would go visit shut-ins, and you relied on that Sunday in, Sunday out connecting with people. And so you probably weren't calling everybody every week.
Exactly right.
You adjusted that for the pandemic and calling people on a regular basis. Were there other pastoral practices that you adjusted and changed in the face of the shutdowns and the resulting year of a pandemic now?
Yeah. So, and probably a similar story with a lot of places, but yeah, hospital visits are, we're not something that we're happening, and still in a lot of ways are not happening. Nursing home visits, that's starting to relax.
Okay.
Home visits, bringing communion to people at home is something that I've started doing again for a while now, but was something that was not happening for a while. And I think just, and I don't know if this is more of a New York thing than it may not be, but just being able to be out in the community and visible and catching up with members, or just people who know you because, you're the pastor of the church on the corner.
Right.
And just having that visibility, that totally changed. It changed everything I do. Yeah.
What now about this visibility in the community? I think you'll be able to provide maybe a perspective that'll be helpful for me, for other folks who only know what's happening in New York City of the pandemic through the news, whatever the news source is.
Sure.
So I'm gonna tell you this, and I want you to kind of give me a different view of New York City. So when the lockdowns hit here in Memphis, as they were hitting around it about a year ago now, I spent most of the last half of March, most of April, and most of May in my backyard with trees to climb, a hammock, a garden, some chickens, dogs, kids. I was mowing the grass like twice a week. I was working in the garden, pulling weeds and doing stuff. I could go walk around the neighborhood, and everybody was out and about, and I could be outside. And having talked to other folks, my family in Texas and other people that I know around the country, they were doing something similar.
Yeah.
Tell me about how things were different in New York City and why that shaped the way that we've been hearing about this pandemic in New York City.
Yeah. I think even though there were a couple of weeks there, starting with the beginning of March, where here we were like, oh, this could be something. We didn't have a lot of time to really, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
From my perspective, the pandemic towards the rest of the country was like this kind of slow rolling thing that you may have gone into lockdown quickly, but the actual impacts of people getting sick or knowing people who were sick, that kind of came much later.
I think so. I think that's probably fair.
Okay. Yeah. So for us, it was immediate. I think, you're talking about just getting around. I mean, we don't have the space, most of us, backyard space to go out and actually feel like you're not still confined.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So like, you and your kids are climbing trees, running around, chickens, folks, even if they have yards here, it can probably get old pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I think one of the more unhelpful things was like closing playgrounds and public parks, which, they corrected over the summer, but I think that was a major error early on. But, it was, myself and encouraging members that, if they felt comfortable, you get out and walk your neighborhood. Reminding some people who maybe couldn't get around as easily or who maybe were a little more reluctant, do you have a balcony in your apartment? Do you have a front stoop of your house? Yeah. Get outside and make sure you're getting fresh air every day.
Sure.
And if it's sunny out, definitely get some vitamin D.
Right.
But, for me, it was walking the neighborhood.
Okay.
But those early days, a lot of people weren't doing that. A lot of people weren't doing that. And I wasn't coming to the church. I live about 3/4 of a mile away from the church. Okay. So I wasn't walking that far.
Sure.
But, walking in the neighborhood, it wasn't, you weren't catching up with people. The sidewalks, even if in Queens, they're a little more spacious than they are in Manhattan. You're used to them being fairly crowded, and it wasn't the case. And and then, you might see somebody, but you're darting to the other side.
Right.
Because, those early days, it was just kind of like that. But it was really colored with the reality for a lot of us that, immediately we knew people who were getting sick. We knew people who were going to the hospital. We knew people who were dying from COVID. And so in addition to just trying to get your bearings straight on something new, there was also like, no, this is actually a real emergency happening in our midst. And for a month straight at one point throughout April, well, first of all, we had about, I think Holy Week is when we peaked last year.
Okay.
Because Easter was like mid-April last year, if I have that right.
I think so. Right.
Holy Week, I think when we peaked, but 900 people a day were dying in New York City.
Yeah.
And for the month of April, every night we heard sirens from ambulances, and you could hear helicopters in what we pieced together was probably people being airlifted to hospitals. But and it was funny because only later, when they kind of tabulated the data, did we realize we weren't just hearing things with the sirens. It was during that time, daily local 911 dispatchers were receiving more calls daily for about a month straight than dispatchers got on 9/11.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was just like, it was more than 9/11 for a month straight. 911 calls. And so it's funny. I think sometime late summer that data came through and you're like, oh, I wasn't crazy. I was hearing sirens.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. Like, so people were very reluctant to kind of get out initially. Right. But over the summer, things did change. Okay. Over the summer, things did change here. And I think people were felt a little more comfortable getting out and about. But yeah.
Now, I appreciate you sharing that and giving some perspective. I hadn't heard that statistic about 911 calls.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing your experience of what is usually presented as like numbers and a brief newscast, you know.
Sure.
I appreciate that personal touch. How is it when, you know, when you're in the midst of that? And I know it's about a year ago, and I don't want to dwell in the grief, but I want to recognize some of that grief and that the shock of that. How did you as a pastor go about addressing these things with your people? And you know, I guess the question is, how did that shape your preaching and teaching?
Yeah. So in Lent, we were doing a study on the small catechism. And then when that kind of switched to, doing a Zoom study on the small catechism, all ideas of, okay, we're going to do a study on the small catechism in 6 weeks in Lent went out the door.
Okay.
And we actually wound up spending probably upwards of 20 weeks with the small catechism.
Okay.
And I think so catechetically, preaching, caring, pastoral care, the thing that really resonated for me is Luther's explanation of the fifth commandment.
Okay.
And I guess, why not just pull it up and read it. But the reason why that really stuck with me, so, you shall not kill, you shall not murder, right? The classic fifth commandment that we have. And then Luther's explanation, what does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. And so when we were thinking of the why for suspending public, not just worship, public everything, right?
Yeah.
The why for that, and thinking through it pastorally, theologically, as a community, the fifth commandment was huge.
Sure.
And just in a very simple, we're not going to do anything that may hurt or harm our neighbor. And the things we are going to do, we're going to look to help and support our neighbor in every physical need. So, we realized a couple of things early on that, folks are taking on a lot of different issues. We, of course, the economic fallout, which is by no means limited to New York, but, folks losing jobs, losing hours, and realizing, man, how can we help and support our neighbor, our brother and sister in their physical need in this time, even from a distance. And so, Church Council came up with an idea of kind of putting together this emergency COVID fund.
Okay.
We wound up giving away several thousands of dollars in the last year to people to be able to make rent, put food on the table, pay for healthcare. It was kind of like, you tell us what it's needed for, and we'll give you what you need. And that is slowed down as of late, thank God, because that means people are kind of getting what they need. That was one way where pastoral care was maybe more so checking in with your shut-ins or your elderly folks who are just more available and accessible in some ways to the working people. But now working people were more accessible. Even if you weren't seeing them face to face, you're talking to them. They're at home during the day. Some of them are losing hours, losing their jobs, worried they might, or worried about, my grocery store is kind of bare bones right now, and I don't want to go there. So, we were, again, the fifth commandment really just kind of came together. And I really think it was because we were just studying the small catechism at that time. If not another, maybe something else from the Bible or something else from theology would have hit us, if at all. But really the fifth commandment just kind of, it started governing everything we did as a parish.
So as you were caring for the physical needs of your people, and you talked about developing that COVID fund, it reminds me very much of in Acts, where they were selling their property and giving, and there was like this daily distribution. So that charity, that Christian love. So as you were taking care of the physical needs of things, and the fifth commandment, how are you taking care of the third commandment? Honor the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, where Luther talks about, wanting and desiring in faith to hear the word of God. How are you, what was, I guess some people want to put those in opposition to each other, that it's either the body or it's the worship, but I think it's probably more together.
Totally.
So what does it look like for St. John's to do that third commandment stuff?
Totally. So any of the stuff that we're focusing on with the fifth commandment or loving your neighbor, I think we at St. John's kind of view naturally as an outgrowth from worship.
Okay.
And as people who are baptized, number one, as people who receive the body and blood of Christ, right? Like that's just kind of, we've received Christ and now we go out into the world and serve our neighbor.
Yeah.
So there was definitely part of that, just as kind of like part of our, kind of our thinking anyway. But so a couple of things. One, early on, I was doing very kind of bare bones stuff, although I did buy this kind of fancy microphone early on.
All right.
But we were doing very bare bones. Like I would just record me kind of going through morning prayer on Sundays. Not live. We upload that to YouTube.
Okay.
And go with it. The longer it went on, realized, okay, we got to incorporate some different things. So we brought the organist back in and the sanctuary, able to social distance and, because folks were at home, let's get them some hymns. And so Sunday, we really focused on trying to have a sung service of the word, if you will. So that kind of developed over time, the Sunday piece.
Okay.
But we, when, just talking to council and members, we were doing Bible study live. And so what was another thing that we could bring for people live or otherwise?
Sure.
And, morning and evening prayer came up. And so during Easter, the Easter season last year, all 7 weeks, I brought morning prayer every morning to folks.
Okay.
And then we transitioned in Pentecost to doing once a week morning and evening prayer.
Okay.
And
these are services from the small catechism or from the hymnal?
These are services from a resource, which I don't have with me. It's a little kind of a Lutheran daily prayer book. Breviary, if you will, called For All the Saints. And it's a 4-volume prayer book, and it has daily readings of scripture, and also a daily reading from a saint, and it could be somebody from as early as the 1st century or from the 20th century.
Sure.
Just a nice compilation of all these things, but we also list the liturgy of morning and evening prayer. And so we were doing that spoken. And I was uploading that on YouTube and Instagram for folks, which was being accessed, and folks gave a lot of positive feedback on. So we actually commissioned a musician to write melodies according to the texts we've been using.
Oh, nice.
And now this Lent, we've been doing evening prayer once a week.
That's cool.
Sung together on Zoom. So that's a really good question. So that's kind of how that grew out. The third commandment piece was, what can we get to people that's accessible to folks, and then for me, as a pastor, I was thinking through, something that really came to mind was the power of the word, right? As Lutherans and me, maybe personally, I really lean heavily on the sacraments as, one, because I really believe in them and I believe they're efficacious, but even as, using it as imagery, I just talked about it as people who are baptized, who receive the body and blood. But one thing that I have appreciated, and I think we as a people have appreciated in the pandemic, is just spending time in the Word and doing that in the daily rhythms of morning and evening prayer. Doing that in we're not going anywhere kind of elongated Bible study. We did the book of Revelation. and then Ezekiel, and
Yeah.
we've just been slowly marching through these things.
Man, you're deep into the apocalyptic.
Yeah, man, we're just going with it. We're going with it. Yeah, we are going with it, and we're just spending. Yeah, so we finished the small catechism sometime maybe around Pentecost. We did Revelation.
Yeah.
And then sometime in the fall, we picked up Ezekiel, and this being able to spend time with people in the Word, I think, has been invaluable during the pandemic.
So talk a little bit more about that. The power of the Word, the power of worship, because I've done a few of these conversations now, and of all the pastors I've talked to, they have all talked, part of their COVID experience was, how do I get the word to the people?
Yeah.
We can't connect, so we're going to lose that connection part, that physical connection part. But there's something about our Lutheran and Christian understanding of worship, and I think you're hinting at it as well in your morning and evening prayer, your ongoing Bible studies, the sung liturgy at Lent. What is it about our understanding of worship and God's word that compels us in the face of a pandemic to take care of the bodily needs, but to really almost bend over backwards to make sure that the word is there? What's our understanding of this that's driving that?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I think it was just the absence from the sacraments. We suspended in-person worship for 4.5 months.
Oh, wow.
We didn't come back until late July.
Okay.
And even then, we've been on an every other week schedule. And this is not the case for many churches out here necessarily. This is just something that, myself, our council, and St. John came up with. But based on guidance.
Sure. Right.
In some ways. But, there were two reasons initially why we decided to do every other week. One was because of kind of the importance you were hearing around the messaging of the 14 days and being able to determine, okay, did something happen at church? Well, we haven't met in 14 days, so no. And also we're not singing in person indoors. And so being able to record music and get that to people was an importance for that every other week thing. But actually this coming Sunday, Palm Sunday, we're starting to meet weekly again.
Oh, great.
And which we're really excited about. But it was really just the distance from the sacraments. I think that just highlighted the word. The word was everything we were doing. And so it's in the liturgy, it's in the readings, just kind of, and of course, stumbling, as we all do, but really trying to make sure preaching was sharp and focused on things and the gospel and the word. So, I think it kind of just came together for us organically where we have this distance from each other, the real physical aspects of worship. And so the word kind of naturally came to the surface as the thing we're gonna, really cling to.
This is the word of God is what is Isaiah 53, 10 and 11, where it talks about the word of God goes out like the snow and the rain and accomplishes what God will have it accomplish. In a lot of ways, it doesn't matter if it's coming electronically or in person, but there is that. But I guess we don't want to lose sight of the incarnation of Christ in our gathering together, right?
Exactly right.
I want to switch a little bit from kind of the pastoral congregational. You're married?
Yes.
Have a child?
Yep, and one on the way.
One on the way. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, August.
August. Very good. That'll be fun. How did this impact you as husband, father, just person in the world? So for example, and some folks will have heard me say this before. I don't have a huge social media presence. I'm not on Facebook, Instagram, whatever. But there was enough of social media seeping into my world where people are like, oh, it's the pandemic, just Netflix all day and drink cocktails all afternoon and da. And I got very I got very angry. I was very angry and frustrated inside that everybody else was getting to work from home and do all sorts of stuff, and this is fun. But my work had increased at church, at home. I couldn't just Netflix and chill. I couldn't just drink the afternoons away, and that was very frustrating and angering for me. I got over it, but that was kind of my personal initial reaction to it. I'm curious what how things went for you.
Yeah, I totally resonate with the idea that my work increased. Totally. Even if it wasn't like being on top of people, just, the things we've been talking about with, recording services alone, just because people see the finished product, just like anything else in life. There are plenty of things that I, as a pastor, don't understand because I just see the finished product. But the work that goes into that, right? It's extra work to record church, even in a live setting, than to just show up and do it on Sunday morning. And so there is that extra time. And then if you're not doing it live like me, then there's the temptation to go and edit stuff, which is horribly stupid. But because it takes up time. So workload definitely increased. But I totally worked from home. I didn't need to be here. We didn't have like a kind of just like this well-oiled machine that needed to be poured into, even during when everybody else was kind of staying at home. But with a toddler running around, that's difficult. So this is where it kind of works with what a lot of people were dealing with. And I think one of the things that I value is I really think I've come away with a really good work-home balance. Where I'm going to work from home, and that's okay. I'm going to take my day off every week, and that's okay. I mean, emergency's not standard. Taking time off is important. Not traveling anywhere, but I took just a solid week off between Christmas and New Year's for the first time probably since last Christmas and New Year's, and that was unbelievable. Even though we didn't go anywhere, it was restorative. And so I think and that was really difficult to get into early on, but wasn't drinking the day away or spending the day watching TV. Can't do that with a toddler. First of all, they own the TV if it's on, right? So that's a whole different ball game. But me and my wife did get into this nice groove at every day at 5 o'clock having a drink together. And it was something to look forward to after kind of craziness of each day, which was cool. And we have a stoop, so being able to go out front, and then the stoop kind of faces the west, so the sun's kind of coming down and you're getting the sun. We got to know our neighbors really well. Even if we weren't right on top of them. Because again, we live on top of them. But one really neat aspect of all this was every night at 7, New Yorkers all across the 5 boroughs, and maybe in other cities they were doing this too. You'd go out on your balcony, out your window, out on your stoop, bang pots and pans, and just kind of as a salute to healthcare workers and folks on the front lines, EMT, police, all these folks who are just doing that, who can't stay home, who are doing that. And then, at first it began, for like a minute, everybody's out there and you say hi, but especially as the weather got better, and you even started to learn things about the pandemic and, about, it was around probably Holy Week last year that we even started wearing masks out here. So we've been doing that for a year or two. And, as you understood things about being outside and wearing masks, and you felt more comfortable just doing outdoor visits with neighbors. So that just became a thing every evening, and the sun is still up after 7 o'clock. And, those quick little things where you're just saying hi to people, banging pots and pans and cheering for a minute, turned into a half hour or longer, hour long, just hanging out with your neighbors. And that became another really valued part of the pandemic. So yeah, I mean, it was totally a really hard, rough adjustment. And then just, doing holidays by yourselves. We both had siblings who got married this year.
Okay.
Brother got married in August. My wife's sister got married in October.
Okay.
So we traveled to those.
Yeah.
But we did Easter last year by ourselves. We did Thanksgiving by ourselves. We had a very small Christmas with my family, which is close.
Okay.
Travel home to see my wife's family this year for Christmas, which is very difficult. But yeah, I mean, so there are those difficulties that just daily and then event oriented around holidays. But, I think we really came away with an appreciation for life, kind of corny, but for each other, for our family, and then, for the community that we live in too.
Yeah.
So
no, I appreciate you sharing that. As we move towards wrapping stuff up, I want to switch a little bit, and I appreciate your reflections on the past year, and even just sharing about life in New York City in a way that something I'm not familiar with, and probably a lot I would guess a lot of other people aren't familiar with as well.
Sure.
I want to shift our attention a little bit to looking ahead a little bit. And I want to start with, how do you think this is going to impact your pastoral practice and your pastoral ministry moving ahead? I mentioned that you blog at the Unbroken Cord, and a number of other, I think they're all Lutheran pastors, right?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You blog there, and in one of your recent posts, you had mentioned the people from the era of the Depression.
Yeah.
How that shaped their whole life. And so like, for example, my grandfather grew up in New York City. His parents came from Sicily. And even when he had moved to Texas and into my childhood, whenever we would go out to eat, he would scrape every little bite of spinach and the little half pat of butter and the little nub of a roll, and he would take all of that with him. And it never made sense to me as a kid. Like this is less than a snack.
Yeah.
But it impacted that era and of his growing up, impacted his mentality for the rest of his life. And so you made that comparison. I'm curious what you think how this is gonna impact you and your pastoral ministry and your pastoral care moving forward.
Yeah. So I mentioned kind of practices of morning and evening prayer before, and commissioning a musician to write melodies for us, continuing with morning and evening prayer. I don't see myself doing it daily for folks. But I really, part of the word again, being able to give people, make the word accessible to people, right? And so give folks a pattern of prayer and a pattern of being in the word that is accessible. Because I think a lot of people get intimidated about devotional life, if you will, and just really the pandemic, I think, taught us as a congregation, and me personally, as a pastor, the need to make a devotion life accessible. And so that people can do it by themselves in their homes, with their families in their homes, and even as a community. I again, musician earlier, had a conversation, what could doing this long-term as community worship look like morning and evening, right? And so I think there are those aspects of it. I think not being afraid to be together outside. At a certain point, we really are going to be past what is, the emergency portion of the pandemic. And so it will not be a necessity in certain ways to be outside, but just taking advantage of a space that's around you. And which I think folks, especially when the weather's nice, it's just nice being outdoors. and kind of gives you a little extra space. We don't really have narthex space.
Okay.
The space we do have is in our school building next door. And like I said, we have a charter in there.
Yeah.
So kind of our stoop, our church stoop, and our sidewalk kind of gives us good spillover space to just spend time on. And I think it also has the added benefit of giving a witness to the community, like, oh, they're here.
Yeah.
And they seem to do things, and
Sure.
that's cool. And, you know, one real tangible way that we are doing that is we actually, we're planting kind of an urban farm.
Okay.
Garden project on unused space on our school property.
Okay.
Yeah, we made a major investment into that. And so we're getting ready to start planting seeds, but the cedar beds were built around Christmas, and soil was put in. And yeah, we're getting ready to do that because it's an outdoor thing. But, you know, one other thing that really came to mind in the pandemic is the amount of food insecurity. So not just that people necessarily may be impoverished or don't have food, but also just don't have access to good food and nutritious food. And so, yeah, we're gonna, God willing, and the weather and the sun do the things they're supposed to do. We're gonna grow food and just give it away to people. All sorts of food. So yeah, I mean, those are a couple of ways, you know, and I think the morning and evening prayer piece and the urban farm piece, that those don't happen without the pandemic. Not right now, not in the way that they're happening. So,
Sure. Now, what in that same piece that you wrote on the unbroken cord, you had talked about the recovery going to take a long time.
Yeah.
And in there you had a sentence, something along the lines of like, I don't know that, I forget exactly what it was, but like, I don't know if our church body is going to do well at things that take a long time.
Yeah.
And it struck me, and I want to hear more about what you have to say, but my initial reaction is that, well, the church has been around for a long time, and we've like, we are the grand champions of sticking around, right?
True.
And I didn't know this when I first reacted to that, but when you shared the history of your own congregation, you know, founded in 1840 and a plant in the 1930s, so your congregation's coming up on 90 years old. From my perspective and from my understanding and looking at this stuff, it says, hey, this recovery might take a long time. We the Christian church, we know how to do a long time.
True.
So that was my reaction to what you had to say, but I'm really curious to some more about what you were thinking there.
Yeah. So yeah, I think without getting into the weeds too much, there's definitely like there's this tension there that I was playing with, where you're right. You know, of all the institutions in the world that don't have to worry about kind of the rat race and the grind, the Christian church is the institution, right? Like we've been around 2,000 years, we're not going anywhere. And even if our individual denominations or congregations are not guaranteed or promised to last until Christ returns, the church is.
Right.
So yes, I think the tension that I feel, and certainly welcome to different perspectives. But the tension I feel is that, and I think this has to do with North American culture. You know, we want to get back to normal. So just kind of focusing on the pandemic, we want to get back to normal. You know, what is normal? And our people want to get back to normal. And that's a totally understandable, sympathetic, you know, feeling. But I think a lot of churches are looking for kind of, you know, a lot of churches are on the kind of the, you know, the decline end of the life cycle, right? And what is that silver bullet that's going to get us to turn things around? and to grow again and to have children and young families and to last for another 150 years at least or whatever. And then I think, when I said church body, I meant the Missouri Synod in particular, which is a numerically declining church body too, just like a lot of churches are. It's my home, so it's my perspective.
Right.
I think even in some other ways, Missouri Synod Lutherans are looking to get back to normal, or even removing beyond the pandemic, looking to find that way to make sure that how can we turn the tide in the Missouri Synod? For some folks, it's doubling down on really kind of narrowly focused, I don't mean narrow in a bad way, but narrowly focused liturgy, right? And ways of doing worship. For others, it's like kind of being more evangelical in style. And, here's how you do church growth stuff. And whether as institutions or as individuals, we seem to always be looking for kind of that silver bullet to help our churches grow or turn it around. And then I think in our own lives, we want that. Dude, I don't like pandemic life, right? And I don't like not seeing family and whatever it is that we are doing and or have done. So we want to get back to normal. But I think as people, we are not. I think as individual people, and then as people who make up institutions that are kind of anxious right now about their own durability. I don't think we do long-term well.
Okay.
And I think kind of digging out of this will take a long time. Because it's for out here, it maybe more so, but there's, the human toll, loss of life. The Atlantic District itself lost, hundreds of, members of the pews. And then the economic toll, the mental and spiritual toll. There's just so many things that, if you just kind of jump back into even, taking away any kind of public health cautions, whatever, if you just jump back into it and you're like, okay, we're back, you still have to deal with what you just went through, whether you did it for 2-3 months, a year and a half, whatever it is. Each person in each congregation is going to have to account for what did that mean, and was any of that good that we should bring with us, and was there anything we learned that we were doing that we should not bring with us because it wasn't good and it wasn't healthy.
So it sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, that you are inviting an evaluation of the things that were going on before the pandemic and evaluating them in a very conscientious way to say, hey, we were doing this thing. And if we were just to jump back in and go back to normal, we bring it back, no questions asked.
Right.
But I think what I'm hearing you say is to have those honest, introspective, reflective things on a congregational level, even on a personal level, and say, hey, we were doing this and we stopped doing this. The moving sidewalk, as you talked about before, came to a halt. And everybody kind of stumbled as all of that momentum was gone. But now as the momentum's picking back up, not just going back to March 17th, 2020, but, and hey, we were doing this. Why are we going to do this again? How can we do it better? What can we do differently?
Yes.
I think is that more what you're
totally. Yeah. So I mean, beyond all these churches, invested in hand sanitizers and stations. So maybe those stay. And it's like, well, we kept that thing, right? I mean, more than that, right? Or some kind of extra step at coffee hour to ensure things are handled rightly. I mean, beyond that, I mean, the way we do meetings, as a body of believers, or as kind of a silly example, but a real world one. Does the church council need to meet in person for every meeting? The answer to that may be no, which may just make people's lives a lot easier getting home from work. Whenever it is that you meet. I know for us, we meet midweek, weeknight after work, and it's totally different, having to skip dinner and rush to church. What your mindset is in a meeting than comfortable at home. You've ate dinner, you're fed,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and you know, and that doesn't, sometimes you need to meet in person. So
Yeah.
I you know,
No,
not saying
I get
that's an absolute universal application, but yeah, so something like that.
Yeah, what I used this example in an elders meeting a couple weeks ago, that the house is burned down.
Mm,
The foundation's still there, right? That the foundation of Christ is there, but the house is burned down.
yeah.
And now you get to rebuild the house in the way that you've always wanted it.
Yeah, I like
You,
that.
you know, so like maybe there was a door that opened a weird way, or it
Yeah.
opened and blocked the hallway, and you always wanted to do it differently there, or the counter poked out just in the wrong spot, and you always hit your thigh on it. And
Yeah, yeah,
now you get to rebuild your house, but that door is going to open in a better way. That counter is not going to quite be there.
totally.
And so there's the almost the whole life. There's the foundation of worship that we've talked about, but everything else that comes out of worship, that comes out of word and sacrament, everything else that comes out of it, you get to ask that question: why are we doing this? How are we doing this? What can we do differently? What can we do better? I think that's to have those deep introspective questions.
Yeah, and I think it's an encouragement to pastors, church workers, and lay people alike. If you're not going to ask those questions now, when are you going to ask them?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Sure.
you're going to wait for the next century pandemic to come along to ask those questions. Like, now's the time to ask those questions.
Yeah,
as far as I'm concerned. No. But
I appreciate you talking with me about those things. Just as a way of closing out, is there? You can do this one of two ways. It doesn't matter to me. Something that's been on your mind that you just haven't had an avenue to get out, and you're like, hey, this has been on my mind. I want to talk about it. To do that, or surprises, positive or negative, from the last year that have just kind of stood out to you, and you're like, well, I wasn't expecting that at all, and is going to kind of stick with you. So something you've been thinking about, or a surprise, or surprises, positive or negative.
Well, I mean, maybe it's a way to bring the two together, because just kind of reflecting on the past year. So something I've been thinking about, but also a surprise. I think, how much I enjoyed, because I like to think of myself as an outgoing person. Okay. How much I've kind of enjoyed the extra time at home, and the meeting less new people, but being able to pour into relationships with, folks that are there, whether neighbors or, that have already been solidified.
Right.
So I think how much I've just enjoyed this new rhythm of life that I would really like to bring forward with me. I think, I don't know if it was kind of partly foolishly romanticizing like the hustle of New York and just kind of being constantly on the go.
Yeah.
You get kind of a buzz off of that.
Sure.
In a certain way, even if it really tires you out.
Yeah.
Where something I've been thinking about, and something that surprised me, is the kind of doing like this Sabbath resistance in New York, and being like, well, yeah, obviously, you're going to work, and it's going to be hard work, and not the future won't always be like this pace. But something that really surprised me is how much I really feel at home in this kind of way of working and living life. So, yeah.
I like that, the image. And as you've talked about, bringing the morning and evening prayer and that rhythm of being in the Word, and now you've gotten into this rhythm of deepening your relationships. It really reminds me of Psalm 1, like a tree planted by streams of water, whose leaf never falls and who bears his fruit in season.
Yeah.
Maybe the image is, and St. Paul talks about this, being deeply rooted, and having to slow down, and the moving sidewalk stopping as the house burning down. You've been able to notice the roots growing, and to feel all of that becoming more rooted in the faith, rooted in your community, rooted in your vocations, and all those different places that God has put you in.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Pastor Matt Stanek, for taking the time today to enlighten me about life in New York City in general, life and the pandemic, and how you've been thinking about these things as a pastor leading St. John's. I want to thank you for your faithful service to God's people there at St. John's and at the community at large for making sure that the word of God has been proclaimed in creative ways, it sounds like, and in daily and regular ways to help people grow and for themselves become more rooted. So thank you for your faithful service there. Thank you for taking time to be a part of this conversation and this series.
Pastor Clayton, thank you, man. This has been great. Yeah.
I'm glad to do it.
You're good at this.
Oh, thanks.
This should be a thing for you. Yeah.
Thank you for everyone for watching. If you would like to have more conversation with myself or with Pastor Matt Stanek, our information will be in the description of this video below. I wish God's richest blessings on you and your family in the days ahead. Bye.